My name is Detective Marcus Thorne. In 25 years on the force, I've walked through the aftermath of countless nightmares, seen the dark side of humanity, and stood in places where life was extinguished in a flash. But nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the Decker family. This case, it's a ghost that follows me, a chilling whisper in the dark. The year is 2025. And Washington State, known for its majestic pines and serene landscapes, became a silent witness to a horror that still has no name. The victims? Travis Decker, a father, and his 3 young daughters, Lily, Maya, and Chloe. Their lives were not just taken, they were erased from the face of the earth, swallowed by the unforgiving wilderness of Juniper Creek. The call came in on a crisp October morning, the kind of day that's meant for hiking and enjoying the last bits of autumn air. The dispatcher's voice was strained, barely holding it together as he relayed the information from a hiker. The man, a local named Gary Jenkins, had stumbled upon a scene of absolute chaos. His frantic, broken sentences painted a terrifying picture before we even got our first look. "There's a car off the road, and a man, and oh God, the children!" His voice broke and the line went silent. We knew then that this wasn't going to be an ordinary day. When my team and I arrived, the scene was worse than the dispatcher had described. It was a tableau of unspeakable violence, a grim painting by a cruel artist. A dark blue sedan, almost completely hidden by dense brush and fallen leaves, sat at an odd angle off a rarely used logging road. The air was heavy, not just with the damp, earthy scent of the woods, but with the metallic, pungent smell of blood. Every cop on my team, even the most seasoned veterans, moved with a quiet, grim efficiency. Their faces were ashen, their eyes filled with a horror that was all too familiar. But this time, it was different. This wasn't just a homicide, it was a massacre. Window or a dented fender. The dense woods are dark and imposing behind the car. The first victim we found was Travis Decker. He was in the driver's seat, slumped over. He had been executed, shot twice in the back of the head. His hands were bound with zip ties, and a gag was still partially in his mouth. The scene spoke of a premeditated, calculated act. He had been subdued, likely at gunpoint, before being killed. But as gruesome as that was, it was the discovery of his daughters that truly shattered our calm. Their small, innocent lives had been extinguished with a brutal, clinical efficiency that turned our stomachs. Lily, Maya, and Chloe were found scattered in the undergrowth, as if they had tried to run. Each girl had been killed with a single, precise bullet to the head. There were no signs of a struggle, no marks of resistance. It was a scene of chilling silence, a horrifying testament to the sheer, unadulterated evil of a killer who had taken the lives of 3 children with such cold, cruel precision. Their small, fragile bodies, dressed in simple autumn clothes, seemed so out of place in the unforgiving wilderness. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, shocked by the tragedy it had witnessed. The forensic team, led by our best, a no-nonsense doctor named Evelyn Reed, moved with the utmost care. Every leaf, every twig, every disturbed patch of earth was potential evidence. The lack of any expended shell casings initially baffled us. It suggested a perpetrator who was meticulous, possibly collecting the evidence to cover their tracks.
There were no footprints other than the hikers and our own, which meant the killer was either incredibly careful or had left no discernible trace. The silence of the crime scene was not a void, it was a deliberate, calculated silence. The isolation of the crime scene was striking. Juniper Creek was a labyrinth of winding logging roads, a place where people went to disappear or to do things they didn't want anyone to see. The nearest residence was over 5 miles away, and the last known sighting of Travis Decker and his daughters was at a small diner in the nearby town of Havenwood, about 20 miles from Juniper Creek. They had been seen just hours before the estimated time of death, seeming happy, normal. The stark contrast between the two locations was jarring, a visual representation of how quickly a life can change.
We started piecing together the last known movements of the Decker family. According to the diner staff, they had seemed happy, enjoying a late lunch. No arguments, no signs of distress. Lily, the oldest daughter, had even ordered an extra slice of pie, teasing her father about it. It was a normal family on a normal day, enjoying a normal meal. It was almost impossible to comprehend how that normalcy could turn into such a brutal and horrific crime. How did a simple family lunch end in this? The question hung in the air, a silent question that we had no answer for. Travis Decker was, by all accounts, a quiet, hard-working man, a widower for 2 years raising his 3 girls alone. He worked as a carpenter, doing odd jobs around Havenwood. No known enemies, no criminal record, no substantial debts. He was devoted to his children, a man you would never expect to be targeted in such a brutal and senseless manner. The profile of the victims simply didn't fit the savagery of the crime. The motive was a ghost, a phantom that we couldn't grasp. My gut told me this wasn't random. The precision of the shots, the remote location, the lack of struggle from the children, it all pointed to a calculated, premeditated act. Someone wanted Travis Decker and his daughters gone. But why? And who? The more we dug, the more questions arose, and the chilling silence of Juniper Creek offered no answers, only echoes of the unspeakable horror that had unfolded there. This case wasn't just cold, it was frozen solid, encased in a layer of deliberate, cruel silence. We started our search at Travis Decker's home, a small 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Havenwood. The place was a mix of a loving father's efforts and the chaotic energy of 3 young girls. Their rooms were a riot of color, filled with dolls, books, and unfinished art projects. The kitchen counter was a gallery of their drawings, held by bright magnets on the refrigerator door. The stillness in the house now felt unnatural, a profound and heavy emptiness. We found no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no indication that a monster had ever stepped foot inside. Everything was in order, as if the family had just stepped out for a quick trip and would be back any minute. Travis was a carpenter, and his workshop behind the house was his sanctuary. It was here that he spent most of his free time, making furniture and small wooden toys for his girls. There was a half-finished rocking horse on his workbench, a testament to a project he would never complete. We searched the entire workshop, every drawer, every tool chest, but found nothing that could shed light on his and his daughter's murders. No threats, no cryptic notes, no hidden valuables. It was as if he had no secrets, no enemies, no one who would want to harm his family. The more we looked, the more we were left with a blank slate. And a blank slate in a murder investigation is the most terrifying thing of all. Our next step was to retrace their last known movements. From the diner in Havenwood, there were 2 possible routes to Juniper Creek. One was the main highway, and the other was a network of smaller, winding back roads.
My team believed they had taken the back roads, as that was the quickest way to get to their home. We set up roadblocks and interviewed every single resident and business owner along both routes, hoping for a lead. Days turned into weeks, but no one saw anything suspicious. It was as if the Decker family had simply vanished into thin air. A perfect, tragic disappearing act. We finally got a break, but it was a small one. It came from an old surveillance camera at a gas station located on the main highway, not the back roads. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see Travis Decker at the pump getting gas. He was alone. The girls were inside the car. The timestamp on the video was 7:15 p.m., hours after they were seen at the diner. This contradicted our theory. They were supposed to be home by then. So why were they still driving? And why were they on the main highway heading away from their home? The simple act of getting gas had just added a layer of profound and unsettling mystery to the case.
We looked into Travis's phone records and found something even more puzzling. There was a long phone call, over 30 minutes, to an unlisted number just minutes before his death. The call was placed on a burner phone, one that was used only once. The phone was a ghost, untraceable, and with no known owner. The call began shortly after they left the gas station and ended at the estimated time of the homicide. Who was he talking to, and what could they possibly have talked about for 30 minutes that led to the brutal murder of his entire family? The call was a silent scream, a final desperate plea for help that was never heard. We sent the phone records to our audio forensic lab. The call was a silent one, just the static of a phone line. We thought it was a prank call, a wrong number, but the length of the call was too deliberate. The forensics team, however, found something we had missed. Deep within the static, there was a faint, almost inaudible sound. It was the distinct sound of a distant train horn. But there were no train tracks near Juniper Creek. The sound was a ghost, a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit, a puzzle that was getting more and more complicated with every passing minute. The train horn was a key clue, a breadcrumb left in the digital static. It meant that Travis was not in Juniper Creek when he made that call. He was near a train track, somewhere else, a place that was not the crime scene. We scoured maps, searched for any train tracks that crossed the main highway from the gas station, and found several. This meant that the killer had directed him to a different location, a place where he could be killed, and then the killer had driven the car and the bodies to Juniper Creek to get rid of them. But why? The motive, the very heart of the crime, was still a mystery, a dark void that we couldn't fill. We started looking into Travis Decker's past again, but this time we looked for anyone with a connection to him, however tenuous. We found that 2 years ago, just before his wife died, he had a close friend named Mark Reynolds. They were business partners, building a small furniture business together. But the partnership ended abruptly after Travis's wife died. We looked into Mark, and we found a motive. He was in deep debt, and he had been trying to get Travis to invest in a risky venture. Travis had refused, and they had a falling out. It was a flimsy motive for murder, but it was the only lead we had. We went to Mark Reynolds' house, a modern, expensive-looking place in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood. He was a man with a reputation for being ruthless in business. When we confronted him about his relationship with Travis, he feigned surprise. "Travis? He was a good man. I don't know why anyone would want to hurt him." But his eyes, they told a different story. They were cold, calculating, and full of a quiet menace. He had a solid alibi for the night of the murders. He was at a business dinner, and several people vouched for him. But my gut, the one that had been right so many times before, told me we were looking at a killer. The more we looked, the more the pieces started to fit. The gas station footage, the phone call, the train horn, and Mark Reynolds' convenient alibi. The murder of the Decker family wasn't random. It was calculated, meticulously planned, and executed with cold, brutal efficiency. But the motive was still a ghost,
a whisper in the woods that we couldn't hear. The silence of Juniper Creek was no longer just a backdrop to a crime. It was a character in the story, a silent witness to a truth that was still hidden, still waiting to be unearthed.
We had Mark Reynolds. He was our guy. But he also had a rock-solid alibi, a business dinner with a dozen people who all swore he was with them the entire night of the murders. A perfect alibi is a fortress, and people who have nothing to hide don't build fortresses. My gut told me his story was a lie, a meticulously crafted piece of fiction meant to deflect any suspicion. I knew if we were going to break this case, we had to find a crack in that fortress, a tiny flaw in his story that would tear it all down. I sent my partner, Detective Liam Carter, to the restaurant. This time, we weren't just checking the alibi, we were looking for anything that didn't fit. Liam spoke with the staff, reviewing the security footage and re-interviewing every single person. The waiter who served Mark that night was a young man, nervous and fidgety. He gave us a small, almost insignificant detail that changed everything. He kept looking at his watch, the waiter said. It was like he was waiting for a call that never came. He seemed distracted, in a hurry to leave, even though the dinner was still going on. It was a tiny thread, but we pulled on it. We looked into Mark's phone records again, this time cross-referencing them with Travis Decker's. We found that the long, silent call that Travis received came from a burner phone, one that was activated just moments before the call was placed. We had already confirmed that the call was made from near a train track, but we missed a crucial detail. The call wasn't just a long, silent one. It was a series of quick, missed calls. A signal. It was a prearranged ghost in the data, a secret code to tell Travis where to go. The train sound on the phone call wasn't an echo of a distant train. It was a close-up sound. We found an old abandoned commuter train line that ran parallel to the highway just a few miles from the restaurant where Mark was having his dinner. This was the place where the call was made. This meant that Mark wasn't at the dinner the whole time. He had a brief window of time, about an hour, where he could have slipped away, driven to the train track, and met with Travis. He would then have killed him, but why bring the bodies back to Juniper Creek, miles away? It didn't make sense. We went to the abandoned train station. It was a desolate, lonely place, a perfect spot for a secret meeting. There was nothing there. No witnesses, no cameras. But as we walked, I noticed something in the overgrown weeds beside the tracks. A small, almost invisible piece of a car tire with a distinct logo on it. It was from a brand of tire that was no longer in production. We ran the logo through our database and got a hit. It was the same brand of tires that was on Travis Decker's car. The tire piece wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a solid piece of evidence. It proved that Travis Decker was at the train station.
With this new evidence, we knew Mark Reynolds' alibi was a lie. We went back to his house with a search warrant. He was surprised to see us, his face a mask of feigned innocence. We found something in his garage that was more damning than anything we had found so far. Behind a false wall, in a small hidden room, we found a collection of old faded newspaper clippings. They were all about one thing: the death of Travis Decker's wife 2 years earlier. The article said she died in a tragic car accident, a silent death that no one had ever questioned. On one of the clippings, a small, almost invisible handwritten note was scrolled. It was a message to himself, a silent confession that we were finally able to read. "He knows. I have to stop him." It was a chilling revelation. This wasn't about money. It was about a secret. This was about a past that Mark wanted to keep buried. We brought Mark in for questioning again, this time with the newspaper clippings. He went pale, his composure shattered. "It's all a misunderstanding," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "I was just worried about him." "No," I said, my voice low and menacing. "You weren't worried about him. You were terrified. terrified that he was going to expose you. The newspaper clipping says his wife died in a car accident, but it doesn't say whose car it was. It was yours, wasn't it? You were driving drunk. You killed his wife, and you made it look like an accident. And he found out, didn't he? He was going to the police. That's why you had to stop him. The color drained from his face, and his composure shattered. He finally broke, his body racked with sobs. I didn't mean to! I didn't mean to hurt them! He was going to ruin me! I had no choice! He confessed. He told us everything. He had met Travis at the train station, and he had killed him there. But he hadn't killed the daughters there. He had brought them to Juniper Creek and had killed them there. Why? I asked him, my voice barely a whisper. Why the daughters? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating madness. He said, They were witnesses, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. They were with him. They saw me. I couldn't leave any witnesses. He had used the train as a decoy, a way to make us think he was somewhere else, but he had driven the car with the bodies back to Juniper Creek to bury them where no one would ever find them. The motive was not just about greed. It was about a dark secret that had followed him for years, a secret that had finally come to light. He gave us the location of the bodies, but he had lied again. He had buried Travis at the train station, but the girls were buried deep in the woods of Juniper Creek. We went back to the crime scene and we found them, buried in a shallow grave near a fallen tree. The silence of the forest was broken only by our own footsteps and the distant sound of a train horn. A mournful cry that echoed through the woods, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded there. We had found the bodies, but the silence would always be a part of this case, a cold, empty echo of a family that had been silenced forever.
The interrogation was a silent, psychological war. Mark Reynolds sat across from us, his face a mask of feigned innocence, but his eyes were a different story. They darted around the room, filled with a cold, calculating fear. He tried to claim that the confession was coerced, that he was under immense stress, and that I, as the lead detective, had framed him. He tried to spin a tale of a misunderstanding, of a business deal gone wrong, but the lie felt hollow. His voice was a thin, trembling whisper, a stark contrast to the man who had been so ruthless in his business dealings. I brought up the death of Travis's wife. The newspaper clipping says she died in a tragic car accident, I said, my voice low and menacing. But it doesn't say whose car it was. It was yours, wasn't it? You were driving drunk, you killed his wife, and you made it look like an accident. And he found out, didn't he? He was going to the police. That's why you had to stop him. The color drained from his face, and his composure shattered. He finally broke, his body racked with sobs. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to hurt them. He was going to ruin me. I had no choice. He was a monster, but his confession was a cold, hard truth that we had been searching for. I looked at him, my voice barely a whisper. Why? Why the daughters? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating madness. They were witnesses, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. They were with him. They saw me. I couldn't leave any witnesses. The chilling silence of his confession was a testament to the sheer, unadulterated evil of a man who would kill 3 children to hide a secret. The motive was not just about greed. It was about a dark secret that had followed him for years, a secret that had finally come to light.
He gave us the location of the bodies, but he had lied again. He had buried Travis at the train station, but the girls were buried deep in the woods of Juniper Creek. He had used the train as a decoy, a way to make us think he was somewhere else, but he had driven the car with the bodies back to Juniper Creek to bury them where no one would ever find them. The motive was not just about greed. It was about a dark secret that had followed him for years, a secret that had finally come to light. We went back to the crime scene, and we found them buried in a shallow grave near a fallen tree. The silence of the forest was broken only by our own footsteps and the distant sound of a train horn, a mournful cry that echoed through the woods, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded there. We had found the bodies, but the silence would always be a part of this case, a cold, empty echo of a family that had been silenced forever.
The case of the Decker homicides became my final one. I retired shortly after the trial, a tired old detective with too many stories to tell. I saw the family's friends and neighbors from time to time, and they would always thank me. Their gratitude was a quiet reminder that my work, no matter how grim, had meaning. The silent woods of Juniper Creek would always hold the echoes of a family's final moments. But for the first time in a long time, the silence was no longer a symbol of unresolved pain. It was a testament to the peace that had finally been found. I still think about the Decker case. I still remember the horrifying silence of the woods and the cold, empty look in Mark Reynolds' eyes. But I also remember the strength of the community, the bravery of the jurors, and the determination of a small police department. The Decker case taught me that evil can exist in the most mundane places, and that justice, no matter how long it takes, is a light that can pierce through the deepest darkness. The silent woods finally found their voice, and the truth, once buried, was finally free.
They say that finding a killer brings peace, that the moment a case is closed, a weight is lifted. They're wrong. When we found Mark Reynolds, when he confessed to the whole gruesome story, a new kind of silence fell. It wasn't the haunting silence of the unknown, but the heavy, somber silence of absolute truth. We had found the monster, but the scars he left on the community were just beginning to show. The investigation was over, but the fight for justice was just starting. Our job now was to make sure that the truth we had unearthed, all the grim, horrifying details, was presented in a way that would put him away for good. The story of the Decker family, once just a chilling local mystery, became a national tragedy. News vans from all over the country lined the streets of Havenwood. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone who would speak, but the community had already found its voice in grief. They came together in vigils, leaving flowers and cards at the Decker family's home, a silent testament to a family that was loved and lost. For a fleeting moment, the chilling silence that had gripped the town for months was replaced by the collective voice of a grieving community, a voice that was both sad and fiercely determined. The trial preparation was a meticulous, grueling process. We had the confession, but a verbal confession can be challenged in court. We needed more. We meticulously documented every single piece of evidence, the tire fragment that linked Mark to the train station, the old newspaper clipping with his handwriting, and the forensic report on the bodies. We cross-referenced every detail of his confession with our findings, building an airtight case against him. The prosecutor, a sharp-as-a-tack lawyer named Sarah Jenkins, told us, "We don't just want to win this case. We want to make sure he never sees the light of day again. We owe it to the Deckers."
The trial was a circus. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken. Mark Reynolds sat at the defense table, his hands clasped together, his face a mask of feigned innocence. But the mask couldn't hide the cold fear in his eyes. The prosecution began her opening statement, recounting the entire timeline of the murders, her voice steady and clear. She described the brutal efficiency of the crime, the quiet terror of the victims, and the cold-blooded nature of the killer. The jury, a group of ordinary citizens, sat in solemn silence, their faces a mixture of horror and grim determination. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the entire case, from the moment the Decker family was last seen to the discovery of their bodies and the confession of Mark Reynolds. The prosecutor, with a firm, steady voice, walked the jury through the evidence we had painstakingly collected. She showed them the gas station surveillance footage, the phone records with the ghost of a train horn, and the tire fragment that linked the train station to the crime scene. It was a methodical, chronological narrative that left no room for doubt.
The first witnesses were called to the stand. The hiker, Gary Jenkins, recounted his horrifying discovery, his voice trembling as he recalled the scene. The gas station attendant testified about seeing Travis Decker at the pump just hours before the estimated time of death. The waitress from the diner spoke about the Decker family's last meal, their laughter, and their simple happiness. Their testimonies painted a picture of a normal family, making the horror of their fate even more heartbreaking. Their words were not just about facts, they were about the human cost of the crime. The prosecutor then pivoted to the motive, the dark secret that had led to the murder of an entire family. She presented the newspaper clippings found in Mark Reynolds' hidden room. She showed the jury the clipping about the death of Travis's wife, and she read the handwritten note on it aloud. "He knows. I have to stop him." The chilling note was a silent confession, a link to a past crime that had been buried for 2 years. The motive was not just about greed. It was about a secret that was so dark, a man would murder an entire family to keep it hidden. Our forensic expert, Dr. Evelyn Reed, took the stand and presented the most damning physical evidence we had. She held up the small piece of tire we had found at the abandoned train station and showed the jury how it matched the tires on Travis Decker's car. The evidence was irrefutable. It proved that Travis Decker was at the train station, a location that was miles away from the crime scene, and it directly linked Mark Reynolds to the location where the crime had been committed. I watched the trial from the back of the courtroom, a silent observer. I had seen all the evidence, heard all the testimony, but the weight of it all was still heavy on my shoulders. I thought about Travis Decker and his 3 young girls, their lives cut short by a cold, calculating monster. I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. We had found justice for them, but it didn't bring them back. This case was not just a file on my desk, it was a part of me, a ghost that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The prosecutor ended her argument by showing the jury a blown-up, smiling family portrait of the Deckers. Their innocent, happy faces were a stark contrast to the grim reality of the courtroom. The jury was moved. The prosecutor's final words to the jury were a simple, powerful plea. Look at their faces. These were not just victims. They were a family, and they deserve justice. The silence that followed was deafening, and I knew that the verdict was a foregone conclusion.
Mark Reynolds took the stand in his own defense. He tried to claim that the confession was coerced, that he was under immense stress, and that I, as the lead detective, had framed him. He tried to spin a tale of a misunderstanding, of a business deal gone wrong, but the lie felt hollow. His voice was a thin, trembling whisper, but when the prosecutor brought up the deaths of the daughters, he went silent. He couldn't justify the murders of the children. His calculated composure was gone, replaced by a defeated emptiness. The jury could see the monster behind the man. The prosecutor's questions were relentless, each one a hammer blow to his carefully constructed facade. She brought up the newspaper clipping, the handwritten note, the tire fragment. She spoke of the cold, calculated nature of the crime, the quiet terror of the victims, and the simple, brutal truth of the motive. Mark's voice was a thin, trembling whisper. He couldn't justify the murders of the children. His calculated composure was gone, replaced by a defeated emptiness. The jury could see the monster behind the man. The jury deliberated for a mere 3 hours. They didn't even need any more time. The evidence was overwhelming, and the cold-blooded nature of the crime had left an indelible mark on their minds. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, the room held its breath. On the charge of first-degree murder of Travis Decker, we, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Reynolds, guilty. The word echoed in the courtroom. On the charges of first-degree murder of Lily, Maya, and Chloe Decker, we, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Reynolds, guilty. The verdict was unanimous. The verdict brought a grim satisfaction. I felt a sense of closure, but it was not a happy one. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the Deckers. Mark Reynolds was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were a final, solemn promise that he would never again walk free. The victim's family and friends wept, not out of sorrow, but out of a profound sense of relief. The long, difficult journey for justice had finally come to an end. The case of the Decker homicides became my final one. I retired shortly after the trial, a tired old detective with too many stories to tell. I visited their graves in a quiet, secluded part of the Havenwood Cemetery. Their 4 headstones, identical in size, stood in a row. I felt the weight of my own past cases lift, as if the ghosts of my past were finally being laid to rest. This case was a wound on the community, but with this verdict, the long process of healing could finally begin. I still think about the Decker case. I still remember the horrifying silence of the woods and the cold, empty look in Mark Reynolds' eyes. But I also remember the strength of the community, the bravery of the jurors, and the determination of a small police department. The Decker case taught me that evil can exist in the most mundane places, and that justice, no matter how long it takes, is a light that can pierce through the deepest darkness. The silent woods finally found their voice, and the truth, once buried, was finally free.